Hi guys. I brought you the 5th part of My Frist Love today. I heard. If only she doesn't try to borrow money, observed my mother. That's exceedingly possible, my father responded tranquilly. Does she speak French? Very badly. HM? It's of no consequence anyway. I think you said you had asked the daughter too. Someone was telling me she was a very charming and cultivated girl. Ah, then she can't take after her mother. Nor her father either, rejoined my father. He was cultivated indeed, but a fool. My mother sighed and sank into thought. My father said no more. I felt very uncomfortable during this conversation. After dinner I went into the garden, but without my gun. I swore to myself that I would not go near the Sasiakin's garden, but an irresistible force drew me thither, and not in vain. I had hardly reached the fence when I caught sight of Zinaida. This time she was alone. She held a book in her hands, and was coming slowly along the path. She did not notice me. I almost let her pass by. But all at once I changed my mind and coughed. She turned round, but did not stop, pushed back with one hand the broad blue ribbon of her round straw hat, looked at me, smiled slowly, and again bent her eyes on the book. I took off my cap, and after hesitating a moment, walked away with a heavy heart. Que suis-je pour elle? I thought, God knows why, in French. Familiar footsteps sounded behind me. I looked round. My father came up to me with his light, rapid walk. Is that the young princess? He asked me. Yes. Why, do you know her? I saw her this morning at the princess's. My father stopped, and, turning sharply on his heel, went back. When he was on a level with Zinaida, he made her a courteous bow. She, too, bowed to him, with some astonishment on her face, and dropped her book. I saw how she looked after him. My father was always irreproachably dressed, simple and in a style of his own. But his figure had never struck me as more graceful, never had his gray hat sat more becomingly on his curls, which were scarcely perceptibly thinner than they had once been. I bent my steps towards Zinaida, but she did not even glance at me. She picked up her book again and went away. The whole evening and the following day I spent in a sort of dejected apathy. I remember I tried to work and took up Gaidanov, but the boldly printed lines and pages of the famous textbook passed before my eyes in vain. I read 10 times over the words, Julius Caesar was distinguished by warlike courage. I did not understand anything and threw the book aside. Before dinner time I pomaded myself once more, and once more put on my tailcoat and necktie. What's that for? My mother demanded. You're not a student yet, and God knows whether you'll get through the examination. And you've not long had a new jacket. You can't throw it away. There will be visitors, I murmured almost in despair. What nonsense. Fine visitors indeed. I had to submit. I changed my tailcoat for my jacket, but I did not take off the necktie. The princess and her daughter made their appearance half an hour before dinner time. The old lady had put on, in addition to the green dress with which I was already acquainted, a yellow shawl, and an old-fashioned cap adorned with flame-colored ribbons. She began talking at once about her money difficulties, sighing, complaining of her poverty, and imploring assistance, but she made herself at home. She took snuff as noisily, and fidgeted and lolled about in her chair as freely as ever. It never seemed to have struck her that she was a princess. Zinaida, on the other hand, was rigid, almost haughty in her demeanor, every inch a princess. There was a cold immobility and dignity in her face. I should not have recognized it. I should not have known her smiles, her glances, though I thought her exquisite in this new aspect too. She wore a light barège dress with pale blue flowers on it. Her hair fell in long curls down her cheek in the English fashion. This style went well with the cold expression of her face. My father sat beside her during dinner, and entertained his neighbor with the finished and serene courtesy peculiar to him. He glanced at her from time to time, and she glanced at him, but so strangely, almost with hostility. Their conversation was carried on in French. I was surprised, I remember, at the purity of Zenita's accent. The princess, while we were at table, as before, made no ceremony. She ate a great deal, and praised the dishes. My mother was obviously bored by her, and answered her with a sort of weary indifference. My father faintly frowned now and then. My mother did not like Zenita either. A conceited minx, she said next day. And fancy, what she has to be conceited about, avec ses mind grisette. It's clear you have never seen any grisettes, my father observed to her. Thank God, I haven't. Thank God, to be sure. Only how can you form an opinion of them, then? To me Zenita had paid no attention whatever. Soon after dinner the princess got up to go. I shall rely on your kind offices, Maria Nikolaevna and Pyotr Vasilich, she said in a doleful sing-song to my mother and father. I've no help for it. There were days, but they are over. Here I am, an excellency, and a poor honor it is with nothing to eat. My father made her a respectful bow and escorted her to the door of the hall. I was standing there in my short jacket, staring at the floor, like a man under sentence of death. Zenita's treatment of me had crushed me utterly. What was my astonishment, when, as she passed me, she whispered quickly with her former kind expression in her eyes, "Come to see us at 8, do you hear? Be sure." I simply threw up my hands, but already she was gone, flinging the white scarf over her head. At 8 o'clock precisely, in my tailcoat and with my hair brushed up into a tuft on my head, I entered the passage of the lodge, where the princess lived. The old servant looked crossly at me and got up unwillingly from his bench. There was a sound of merry voices in the drawing room. I opened the door and fell back in amazement. In the middle of the room was the young princess, standing on a chair, holding a man's hat in front of her. Round the chair crowded some half a dozen men. They were trying to put their hands into the hat, while she held it above their heads, shaking it violently. On seeing me, she cried, "Stay, stay, another guest, he must have a ticket too," and leaping lightly down from the chair she took me by the cuff of my coat. "Come along," she said, "why are you standing still? Messieurs, let me make you acquainted. This is M. Valdemar, the son of our neighbor. And this," she went on, addressing me, and indicating her guests in turn, "Count Malevsky, Dr. Lushin, Maidanov the poet, the retired Captain Nermatsky, and Byelov Zorov the hussar, whom you've seen already. I hope you will be good friends." I was so confused that I did not even bow to anyone. In Dr. Lushin I recognized the dark man who had so mercilessly put me to shame in the garden. The others were unknown to me. Part 5 is over today. See you in Part 6. Bye.